Hey everyone, and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Canon old, now we call it the old, but it was the original F1. If you would like to have a companion to this video to help learn how to use your camera, I have made a book that's available on Amazon. I don't have a pre-production copy of it just yet, but it is linked in the video description, both the print copy and the Kindle ebook. And it's a nice small little book you can carry around in your camera bag or just read along. It has basically all of the same information that's in this video in print form if that helps you learn a little bit better. The Canon original F1 is a 35mm interchangeable lens camera. What does that mean? It takes 35mm film, and it can use any 35mm film. The lenses on it can be taken off and put back on at any time when you aren't taking a photo without affecting your images. And single lens reflex means it has a single lens. The light from the lens bounces off a mirror that's inside of it up to this prism up here and then out to your eyepiece. The prism uses what's called a reflex mirror reflex housing, and then you look through the eyepiece to see what's actually coming in through your lens until the moment that you take the photo. The F1 original uses a 12% semi-spot meter. What does that mean? It means that in the center of your image, there's an area that's about 12% of the image area. That contributes to 100% of the image metering information. So you can use that central area, which is about like that, give or take. And what you can do is you can compose your image. So let's say you want to have a person's face over here. You meter off your person's face, dial in your settings, recompose so that the person's face is up here, and then their torso is down here, if we assume we're taking a portrait orientation image. And then you have a proper meter reading for their face instead of the bright white or dark black shirt that they're wearing. It has shutter speeds of 1 second to 1/2000th of a second and bulb. The standard viewfinder magnification, which this is not, this is the sport finder. The standard has a 0.77x viewfinder magnification with 97% frame coverage. What does that mean? Let's say that what you're looking at right now is what's going to be on the film. What you would see in the standard viewfinder is 77% of the size of what will reach the film, and then about 1.5% on each side, and the top and the bottom will be cut off. And this image overlay right now is going to show you what that looks like with the sport viewfinder. It's the only one I have. When looking through the viewfinder at a square on my dry erase board, and then also a picture below that of the same square with taken on it as it's projecting onto a piece of frosted plastic with the shutter open. It comes with a swappable focusing screen that had 9 options. We'll see how to do that in the second video. It had swappable prisms with multiple options. We'll see how to do that as well in the second video. The flash sync on this camera is 1/60th of a second, that orange 60 right there, for X-type flashes. This is an X-type flash. If your flash has a reusable bulb, it's X-type. If your flash has a single-use bulb that's replaced every time you use it, then that's an FP focal plane style flash. And on this camera, it can take FP bulbs, and you get flash sync up to 1/2000th of a second. This was Canon's first serious attempt at a professional system camera, and it is quite successful. In fact, I've had the new F1 version of this as well, and I will say I much prefer this over the new F1. This is one of my 2 or 3 favorite cameras ever made. The Canon original F1 was made for the professional market. It's amazingly expandable. It has around 120 system components that allow this to be customized for basically any use. That would be things like the focusing screen, prisms, film backs, different stuff like that. And I think the actual number was 123. It also has excellent build quality. One of the reasons I like this more than the F1 new is that, well, this camera's older, and it also has proven much more reliable than the F1 new that I did have. And it's a fantastic camera and a joy to use. It was made by Canon in Japan from 1971 to 1976 as the original, and then from 76 to 81 as the F1N. The F1N looked exactly the same, but it had minor mechanical improvements. The model that's shown here, this one right here, is an F1N. And what that means, and we'll know that in a bit, I'll show you how with the date code. but we know that it's an F1N because of when it was made, and that means it has all of those internal improvements. So if you take your Canon F1 really quickly, and you open up the back of it, you might or might not be able to see, right there in the film cassette chamber, there's a date code. Mine reads R407, and basically what that tells us is that this camera was made in April of 1977. This camera was preceded by nothing directly, as it was Canon's first venture into the professional 35mm SLR market, and it was followed by the Canon F1 New, which included all of the internal components or betterments that the N has, as well as adding a bunch of new features. So as we do, we're going to go over all of the features on the camera here, and in the second video we'll talk about what all of them do and how to use them to make the most out of your photography with this camera. Technically on the front, we're going to start here with the strap lugs. This is where you would connect your camera strap. Up here on the top, we have a hot shoe mount. I do not have the hot shoe accessory that fits into this, but there are two contacts here, and there would be a little thing that would fit over the film rewind, and then you could plug a flash into that, so you could trigger your flash without any, regardless of which prism you had. Film rewind knob and lever right here, and this is your film rewind knob release lock button right here. You push this down to lift up the film rewind knob so we can get into the camera. Here are a couple more flash contacts on the back. This is your film plane indicator so that you know exactly where your film plane is if you're going to take very exact measurements for things like macro and microscopy work. This illuminator window right here allows you to allows light to get into your meter so that you can see your meter needles at any point. This is the prism housing right here. This is the shutter speed dial selector. There's a little index on the side of your prism. This one has a little dot right there that lets you know which shutter speed you're selected to. You see that those green letters that say ASA right there. Those indicate that the numbers in this window are your film speed, which you can adjust by lifting and turning. ASA and ISO are the exact same, so if you have this set to 400 ASA, it would be set correctly to use 400 ISO film. Right here we have a film, your shutter button lock. You can turn it from locked like this to active, and there's a little thumb grip right here, and then there's a little index on the side right here. Shutter button, film advance lever, frame count window, and frame count window index. And then right up here on top we have this little metal pin on top of the shutter button, and what this does is there was a housing that allowed automatic aperture controlling, or housing, or a prism. It was enormous, and this was the connection that told it what the shutter speed was. I've never seen it. Apparently they are quite uncommon to probably very rare, and like I said, enormous. I think they were basically as big as this camera, if not bigger. On the camera's front, we have a few things to look at. Right here is your model number. This is your self-timer combo switch, which includes your self-timer, depth of field preview, or stop-down meter lever. It's a dual function, as well as your stop-down metering lock and your MLU lever. And we're going to take a look at how to use this in the second video, because it's a complex bit of engineering that is really neat and useful. The camera's mount right here. This is an FD breech mount. It is also compatible with FDN lenses like this one, and you can also use FL lenses with stop-down metering, and we'll talk about how to do that in the second video. Here's your mirror and your internal components. Over here on the side, there's this little door that opens up right here, and then it has a little connection. And what that does is that is a connection for your servo EE coupling socket. So that's the prism that connects to the silver peg up here. So that big thing that fits somewhere around the camera connects both of these places, and then it has things like aperture priority shooting. That might actually be its only job. I've never actually seen one of those, so I don't know how they work or how to connect them. On the camera's sides and back here, we have a flash PC socket, so you can connect a flash via this socket with a PC cable. And we'll talk extensively about flash use in the second video. This side doesn't have anything, but on the back, we have a few different things. Up here, we have your battery check button and meter on button. So if the switch is down to on, your light meter's on. This is off and also indicates that you can use a flash. You can always use a flash with this camera, but back in the day, light metering would not have been used for flash. You would have done manual calculations for flash power and things like that, and your light meter could be off. And then if you want to check your battery, you set your ISO to 100 and your shutter speed to a 2000th and check your battery right here. And we'll see how, I'll explain exactly how to understand that when we change the battery in video 2. Serial number, this is your viewfinder right here on top of the sport finder. On the bottom of the sport finder is a release button. We'll see how to use in video 2 to change out the prism. Film memo holder, so when you take your 35mm film out of the box, you tear the box tab off and you stick it in here, and then you know exactly what kind of film you're using, the ISO, and how many frames are on it. The bottom of the F1 doesn't have very much. What we have is the battery chamber right here. It's video 2. Tripod socket. Film rewind release button right here so that you can rewind your film when you're done with a roll. Next, we're going to look inside the camera. To get inside of the camera, you push down on this silver button right up here on the front and lift the film rewind knob. And then when you lift the film rewind knob all the way, the back will pop open and you can get inside of it. So here's the film cassette chamber. In the second video, I'll load film in here, and this is where it'll go. This is a little retainer to help the film cassette stay properly aligned. There's a little pin right here that helps the film come out of the cassette correctly so that it's moving through the camera correctly. These 4 guide rails are the film guide rails. The 2 on the top and bottom allow the film to move without moving up and down. When the film rests inside of the camera, it rests between those guide rails so it can't move up and down. And you might notice the 2 on the inside rest behind those sprocket holes, and those allow the film to be sandwiched flat within the camera, these 2 on the inside. When the film back is closed and the film pressure plate, we'll see that in a second, squashes the film. Shutter. Film tension sprocket. This keeps proper tension on the film and helps pull it through the camera in proper alignment. Film take-up spool. This advances the film through the camera and pulls it up into this spool so that it can move out of the way to take the next photo. A repair sticker indicating that at some point this camera was repaired by Camera Tech. I tend not to take those out because I think they're an important part of the camera's history. A couple of rollers here. These are your film guide rollers, and they fit right here and here when the film back is closed. In fact, I'll show you that, because right here is a pin that you can use to take the film back off. Just push the pin toward the bottom of the camera, and you can take the film back off. So when the back of the camera is closed, these 2 rollers line up right here, and they make sure that the film sprocket holes are engaged with that sprocket. Film pressure plate right here, and you can see how it lines up on these guide rails so that the film can be squashed flat in between them. And then over here we have a little cassette retaining spring so that the film will stay properly aligned within the camera and so that film will exit it correctly. I do have some tips for using your Canon F1. We talked about this first one a little bit right up front. It uses that semi-spot meter. So I think I said up front that 100% of the meter comes from that central 12%. It might be more like, this is like center weighted, where it's like 60-40 or 70-20. There might be some metering information from around the outside. You know, I couldn't find that in a way that satisfied my data question, or my question about exactly how that worked. Anyway, what that semi-spot meter does is that if you take a reading off your primary subject and dial in your settings, you can recompose. The other thing you can do is take meter readings off 2 or 3 areas in your scene and average them. So if you know up here you've got a really bright spot that's 1/1000th at f5.6, and down here you've got a really dark spot that's 1/125th at f5.6, then halfway in between those, well, actually I guess 1/60th would be better, because then halfway in between those is 1/250th. You can split the difference. And that's what that does basically, is that uses multiple zones within the image to create an average meter reading. You can also use the Sunny 16 rule with this camera on the fly, because the battery for this camera only powers the meter. You don't need a battery in here for the shutter speeds to work accurately. So some things not to do with this camera. Don't store it with the shutter ready to fire. Anytime you're done for the day, always trigger the shutter. Even if you have a roll of film in here, it's better to waste the film than leave the shutter armed, because when you advance the film to arm the shutter, you're putting tension under a bunch of springs. This is all mechanical. And if those springs sit for time under tension, they can develop a memory or get fatigued, which can lead them to break or have improper shutter timing. Also, don't touch the shutter curtains, because that's a really good way to brick your camera and ruin the curtains. Don't touch the mirror that's behind this lens, because your finger oils can cause it to be tarnished, which can throw off metering in extreme cases or lead to a darker viewfinder if you're looking through your prism. Don't leave your camera in your car, because heat can cause the lubricating oils in it to get very thin and get to places that they shouldn't be, and then when they get back to their proper viscosity, oh no, now you have a mess. Or if it's very cold, they can get thick and gummy and break down, and then they also don't work. Plus, cameras are always going to be a thief's target. If your camera is in your car, that's a good way to come back, even if you just pop into the gas station to grab a Twinkie to a broken window and no camera. Don't keep it in a plastic bag or box unless you have a very good rechargeable desiccant pack in there, because plastic is moisture permeable, and if moisture gets into this camera, it can cause fungus in the optical system of the camera or your lens, or lenses if they're all in that same box, which can cause you to have poorer image performance. You could also get mildew growing in the covering here, which makes it smell very bad when it's up against your nose. Don't let your Canon original F1 get wet. It's not weather sealed, and water getting inside of it can rust components that would absolutely cause your camera to stop working. And just remember that your Canon original F1 is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that's it for video 1, where we cover what everything is. In the second video, we'll talk about what everything in the camera does and how it affects your photography.